comedy is one of the more popular movie genres out there, and it's not too difficult to see why that is. People love humor, so the idea of a movie whose sole purpose is to make people laugh is rather appealing. And what also helps is that there are so many different forms of comedy, from black to lowbrow to sophisticated, that chances are there's at least one type that'll appeal to any given person. But today, I'd like to go over a slightly different style of humor, specifically what's known as crosses the line twice, and in particular demonstrate a movie that did it completely wrong, as well as a couple that did it right. Now, obviously, there will be spoilers ahead for most of the movies I mention, so in case there's something you've been meaning to watch, you might just want to be on the lookout. And I would also once again just like to note that I am by no means an expert on this subject. In fact, comedy was one genre I specifically went out of my way to avoid when writing books. I don't know how to write humor very well. So this is simply my very amateur opinion based off the various movies I have watched. So if you're looking for somebody with more professional knowledge and experience on the subject, please feel free to click off this video. Alright, so with all of that out of the way, let's get right into it. Okay, so in case you don't even know what that means, crosses the line twice is a form of humor that takes something horrible or disturbing and exaggerates or takes it to such a ridiculous extreme that it goes all the way back around and ends up coming across as funny rather than terrible. And a famous example of this would be the Looney Tunes short Feed the Kitty, specifically the iconic scene where the dog reacts in horror because he believes his owner is turning the kitten into cookies. And at first glance, the scene shouldn't even be funny. After all, the poor dog is left a bawling mess, believing it's his fault that an adorable kitten just died a horribly painful death. And yet, in context, it left 1952 audiences laughing hysterically. Why is that? Well, the first reason is because the audience knows the kitten is fine. The writers make absolutely sure to show the kitten escaping from the baking bowl and is perfectly okay. Therefore, Mark Anthony's subsequent over-the-top reactions to what he believes to be the kitten's suffering ends up coming across as hilarious, because the audience knows that he's distraught over nothing, and the extremely exaggerated faces he's making only seal the deal. Basically, the writers want you to laugh at his expense because the joke's on him. The kitten's absolutely fine, and he'll find that out in due time. And the exact same goes for Monsters, Inc. as well, where they borrowed the exact same concept. The audience knows Boo is okay, but Sully doesn't. And this time, the punishment Boo is put through and Sully's reactions are so over the top and extreme that it can't be anything but hilarious, even if it should be considered horrible in concept. Now, some movies that are also famous for using this form of humor would be Cruel Intentions and The Wolf of Wall Street, because in the former's case, it takes all of these ordinarily horrifying and terrible concepts and plays it so shamelessly and in such a ridiculous fashion that the audience ends up finding it impossible to take it seriously. Especially with Sarah Michelle Gellar playing her part like an over-the-top Disney villain to boot. It's a completely horrible story about horrible people, but is so over the top that you can't take it at face value. And the same goes for The Wolf of Wall Street. Again, a shameless criminal scamming innocent people out of their money while using that same money to dive straight into complete hedonism, all the while acting completely unapologetic about it? Honestly, The audience should absolutely despise Jordan Belfort and everything he does, but instead they're left laughing at his completely self-indulgent behavior and actually find themselves rooting for him to a degree. And once again, all of that comes from the way everything is presented. It's all portrayed as so ridiculous and over the top that the audience can't help but laugh at it. And Leonardo DiCaprio perfectly portrays him so that you find yourself liking him despite the fact that he's a complete crook. Seriously, a guy getting plastered on drugs, crawling to his car, nearly killing himself getting home, getting into a crawl fight with somebody else that's plastered while mumbling to get off the phone, and then having to save them from choking to death should not be so funny. But the performances, combined with the context presented, is so ridiculous that the audience can't take it seriously. And that's exactly what Martin Scorsese wants. And what also helps both these movies is that they're still perfectly capable of being serious and delivering an emotional punch when they so choose, allowing their few genuine moments to still work very effectively. Now, please do note here that all kinds of humor are subjective. What's funny to one person may very well be completely unfunny to somebody else. And that's even more so the case with this kind of humor. So if you didn't find any of these examples funny, that's perfectly okay. It just probably means that it isn't your kind of thing. But either way, I think you get the picture at this point. To oversimplify it one more time, something ordinarily terrible can come across as funny when the context makes it too ridiculous, extreme, or over the top to take it seriously. But that being said, now that I've covered a couple of examples that use this template correctly, I would now like to demonstrate a movie I once saw that did this completely wrong. And that would be the 1965 black comedy How to Murder Your Wife. Now, by the title alone, it's obvious the writers were going for this kind of humor. But to give a brief summary of it first, How to Murder Your Wife stars Jack Lemmon as a middle-aged bachelor who lives vicariously through the comic strips he writes for a living, and above all despises marriage and women. And, naturally, is surrounded by dozens of men that feel exactly the same way about the opposite sex. After a drunken party, however, Lemon finds himself married to an Italian model who doesn't believe in divorce, and quickly finds his life turned upside down and in a downward spiral as he tries to cope with the trials of marriage. Now, obviously a movie with a premise like that would never fly today, but I'm pretty sure the movie is meant to be a satirical take on the henpecked husband stereotype. But either way, the point is, the movie as a whole isn't terrible, but completely fumbles the ending. And that's where it crosses the first line, but not the second one. Because unlike what the title suggests, Lemon never actually considers murdering his wife. What happens is that after getting married, Lemon has his comic strip character do likewise, because the character is modeled after him. But after being accidentally humiliated one too many times by his wife, Lemon decides to cope with it by having his character kill off his wife in the comic strip and go back to being a spy. But because he insists on authenticity, Lemon acts out the crime exactly as his character will do it first, only using a mannequin in place of his wife. Only his wife finds the comic strip shortly after the fact and is so upset that she quickly runs off and brings nothing with her. With his wife now missing and his comic strip showing exactly how he could have committed the crime, Lemon is quickly put on trial for murder with all the evidence stacked against him, to the point that even his own lawyer believes he's guilty. But that's not where the issue comes in. The problem is with how he gets himself off. Accepting that he's never going to prove himself innocent, he instead outright tells the jury that he murdered his wife, but appeals to the henpecked nature of the jurymen that it was a justifiable homicide. And he further argues that by letting him off, it'll send a message to wives everywhere to back off a little and let their husbands have a little freedom. And it works. They find him not guilty, and the men leave the courtroom cheering while the women just sit there. But the thing is, so is the audience. I guarantee you that that was intended to be the funniest moment in the movie, only nobody's laughing at it. Because, to put it simply, that's not funny. Whether you love politically incorrect humor or not, that's not funny. I don't care how henpecked a husband is. That does not justify letting a man off for murdering an innocent woman. Now, sure, the audience knows he never even considered murdering his wife and that she is alive and well. But the jury doesn't, and they still willingly let a man off even after telling them straight to their face that he murdered his innocent wife. It's not presented as ridiculous, it's not portrayed as over the top, and it's not all that extreme. It's something the audience can still take seriously, and they're probably apt to find it in very bad taste because of it. Basically, it's not crazy enough to cross the line twice, but still horrible enough to cross the first line. Now, to be fair, obviously the writers don't want the audience to take it seriously, but the problem is that they took the joke way too far with too little justification. Really, the best thing it does is prove how good a person Lemon's character is, because once his wife returns, he's reminded that he can legally kill her and get away with it, but instead chooses not to and finally accepts that for all its problems, marriage is ultimately worth it. But again, from a writing standpoint, that still doesn't justify how he got off in the first place. To put it simply, if he had gone up to the jury and said, "I didn't murder my wife, here's why," and just did a jig, and they found him not guilty solely based on that, that would be crossing the line twice. Because they found him not guilty of murder over something so stupid, ridiculous, and irrelevant that you can't take it seriously. Him admitting he murdered his wife and giving a complex explanation based off the stereotype that wives ruin their husbands' lives, and therefore the murder of one of them should be considered justifiable homicide, is not. Because in all honesty, the fact that it works comes across as pretty disturbing rather than funny, especially with all the implications involved. And as I just said before, in order for that joke to work as intended and cross the second line, he would have had to find a way to get himself off on something a lot more ridiculous or unbelievable. And to use the same actor, another Jack Lemmon comedy where this idea actually worked better is in Irma la Douche. Because, to keep it short, Lemon's character ends up donning a dual identity, but becomes so jealous of his alter ego that he throws his clothes in the river and basically says, "Bye-bye." When a rival sees him do this, however, he successfully gets him sent to prison for basically murdering himself. But it doesn't end there either, because after managing to break out of prison, Lemon is able to clear his name by redonning the disguise and walking right out of the same body of water he'd thrown the clothes into, thus proving that he didn't murder him. In this case, the whole thing is so crazy and ridiculous, especially because the alleged victim never even existed, that it all comes across as pretty funny as a result. And to use one final example of this, the original final credits scene for Deadpool 2, a character who practically runs on crosses the line twice humor, mind you, had to be reshot because the particular joke didn't cross the second line, which is that he visits the baby version of a certain German dictator to kill him, but can't bring himself to kill a baby and instead changes his diaper. Now, the reason that this joke didn't work is because said baby grew up to be such a horrible person and take the lives of so many people that most people wouldn't care if he was a baby and would jump at the chance to kill him before he could do any of that regardless. So that's why they switched it to him killing Ryan Reynolds before he could make Green Lantern, because the self-deprecation is so obvious and brutal, you can't help but laugh. And really, unless you're Charlie Chaplin, Mel Brooks, or possibly Taika Waititi, it would honestly be really difficult to do crosses the line twice humor with that particular dictator, which is why most comedians choose to avoid that subject, and definitely for the best. But that aside, I think I've made my point quite clear on how that style of humor does and doesn't work, and how it should and shouldn't be used. As I've already made quite clear, if somebody's going to use it, they should really make sure the final punchline is as ridiculous and crazy as possible, just to ensure that it does indeed come across as funny and not accidentally terrible or disturbing, like in How to Murder Your Wife. Okay, I think that's everything I had to say on that. So now I'd like to hear your thoughts. Do you enjoy crosses the line twice type humor, or do you believe it's one of the most unfunny forms of comedy out there? Please let me know what you think in the comments. And thank you all for watching. It is very greatly appreciated, and I hope to see you all next time.